Jerry Brudos, aka the Lust Killer, also known as the Shoe Fetish Slayer, was born on January 31st, 1939 in South Dakota. His mother subjected him to emotional and physical abuse as she wanted a girl and not a second son. He had a fetish for women's shoes since the age of 5. As a teen, Jerry began to stalk local women, knocking them down, choking them unconscious, and fleeing with their shoes. He even abducted one at age 17. While serving time for that, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Between 1968 and 1969, Jerry bludgeoned and strangled 4 young women. First was a saleswoman, whom he lured to the basement while his wife and kids were in the house. He strangled her to death, modeled her in stolen clothes, and even sawed off her left foot so he could continue to take pics of it in different shoes. The other 3 were also abducted and strangled, sometimes wearing women's clothes himself. He would perform necrophilia, and once finished with the bodies, he would tie them to a car part and toss them in the Willamette River. Jerry would wear high heels and masturbate after committing each murder. In May 1969, a fisherman found some of the bodies. Police got a description from some students at a nearby university. At his garage, police found copper wire that was cut with the same tool that cut the cords used to tie the bodies. Jerry was arrested and made a full confession. On June 28, 1969, Jerry was sentenced to 3 life terms. Israel Keyes was born in Utah on January 7, 1978. He was the second born of a large religious family. To survive, the Keyes children were made to hunt their food. Israel hunted anything with a heartbeat and freely admitted to skinning deers alive to his peers at the church. As a result, Israel was ostracized and started developing antisocial behaviors. Keyes, who stood 6'2" by age 14, admitted to shooting at neighbors' houses with his BB gun, starting fires in the woods, and breaking into houses for fun. In July 1998, Keyes enlisted in the army. As a gunner, he was honorably discharged in 2001. An FBI report stated that Israel burglarized 20 to 30 homes across the US and robbed several banks between 2001 and 2012. He is believed to have been responsible for as many as 11 deaths in the US. Unlike most serial killers, he did not have a victim profile. Israel took extraordinary actions to avoid detection. He was arrested on March 13, 2012 by Texas Highway Patrol. His car was identified as the vehicle used by someone withdrawing money from ATMs from one of his deceased victims' debit cards. He was extradited to Alaska, where he confessed to the murder and corroborated to other crimes. On December 2, 2012, he committed suicide by cutting his wrist and hanging himself in his cell. Arthur Shawcross, aka the Genesee River Killer, was born on June 6, 1945. He grew up in upstate New York, where he claims to have been sexually assaulted by his mother and had sexual relations with his sister. He was a frequent bedwetter and a bully in school. In April 1967, at age 21, Arthur was drafted into the army. After being discharged, his first known murder was that of a 10-year-old boy whom he raped and killed. Just prior to the body's discovery, Arthur raped and killed an 8-year-old girl. He was arrested the next day. A plea bargain was made to drop the double murder to manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years. After 14 years imprisonment, inexperienced prison staff and social workers concluded that Arthur was no longer dangerous, disregarding the warnings of psychiatrists who assessed Arthur as a schizoid psychopath. He was released on parole in 1987. This decision remains controversial to this day and sparked outrage among the public. In March 1988, Shawcross began murdering again, primarily targeting prostitutes in the Rochester area and dumping the bodies near the Genesee River, earning him the nickname the Genesee River Killer. He was captured 2 years later after a witness identified him after killing his last victim. He was convicted of 11 murders and sentenced to 250 years this time. Arthur died on November 10, 2008 due to a cardiac arrest. Donald Harvey was born in Ohio on April 15, 1952. He began working in hospitals at the age of 18. Between 1970 and 1987, Donald embarked on a shocking murder spree. He worked in a variety of hospitals throughout Kentucky and Ohio and used various methods to kill his victims, including poison, suffocation, insulin injections, and once even inserted a coat hanger into a catheter, causing the patient to bleed to death. His victims ranged from children to elderly, men and women of various races. The only thing they had in common was that they were all cardiac patients. His victims also included neighbors and a lover of his whom he suspected of infidelity. It's estimated that he may have murdered as many as 87 people. Donald slipped in March 1987. An autopsy of a patient who had died abruptly after spending several months on life support revealed large amounts of cyanide in his system. He became a POI when investigators learned he had been forced to resign after he was caught stealing body parts for occult rituals. When they brought Donald in, he confessed to his crimes, providing gruesome details and showing no remorse for his actions. Ultimately, Harvey pled guilty to 37 murders and sentenced to multiple life terms. On March 28, 2017, Harvey had been found in his cell severely beaten to death. John Joubert was born on July 2, 1963 in Nebraska. After his parents divorced, he was not allowed to visit his father and grew to hate his controlling mother. To compensate for these feelings of isolation, he joined the Cub Scouts in 1971. It was around this time that his sadistic and homicidal fantasies progressed to the point where he contemplated murdering strangers on the street. He was a bully throughout high school and even stabbed or slashed other students. He then went to murder 3 boys from August 1982 to December 1983. The murders were brutal. Some was bound with a special rope. All 3 were stripped, stabbed, and slashed several times. Kidnappings are under FBI jurisdiction, so they started investigating the case. On January 11, 1984, a preschool teacher in the area of the murders called police to say that she had seen a suspicious man driving in the area. When the driver saw the teacher writing down his license plate, he stopped and threatened her before fleeing. A search warrant was issued, and rope consistent with that used to bind the kids was found in his room. John confessed to killing the boys, and on January 12 was charged with their murders and sentenced to death. He was executed on July 17, 1996 by the state of Nebraska in the electric chair. Joseph Naso, was born on January 7, 1934, in Rochester, New York. His criminal activities escalated in the 1970s when he moved to California and worked as a freelance photographer. He was known as the double initial killer because many of his victims had the same first and last initials, such as his first known victim, Roxane Rogash, and Carmen Colon. He would strangle or suffocate his victims and often rape them before or after their death, leaving their lifeless bodies in remote locations. Joseph's reign of terror continued for years, with additional victims being discovered over time. It wasn't until 2010 that he was arrested, largely thanks to a probation search of his home. Inside, authorities discovered some chilling evidence, a handwritten rape diary, and a list of 10 women with alliterative initials. Some can even be traced back to the New York alphabet murders. In 2013, Joseph went to trial. He represented himself and tried to argue that his writings were fictional and not confessions of actual crimes. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. William Bonin, aka the Freeway Killer, was born on January 8, 1947 in Connecticut. Raised in a dysfunctional family, he experienced physical and emotional abuse. He was placed in juvie for petty crimes like theft, where he was molested by an adult counselor. Following his release, William began sexually fondling his younger brother and confessed to orally copulating younger boys. In the mid-60s, the family relocated to California. After dropping out of high school in 1966, William began luring and molesting several neighborhood children. Frequently worried he would be arrested, his mother evicted him from the house. In 1969, he was arrested by police, fitting the description of a serial rapist in the area. William was indicted on 5 counts of kidnapping and 4 counts of sodomy. 2 psychiatric examinations determined him to be a sexual psychopath who had little control over his impulses. He was released 5 years later. From 1979 to 1980, William continued to target teenage boys, often hitchhikers, luring them into his van. Once inside, they were subjected to acts of violence and torture. He was arrested and charged with the murders of at least 21 young men. He was executed by lethal injection in 1996, becoming the first person in California to be executed this way. Samuel Little, aka the Choke and Stroke Killer, was born on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia. He began having sexual fantasies about strangling women as a child, starting when he saw his kindergarten teacher touch her own neck. He collected true crime magazines depicting the choking of women as a teen. By 1975, he had been arrested 26 times in 11 states for crimes including armed robbery, aggravated assault, and rape. In 1982, Samuel was arrested in Mississippi. A grand jury declined to indict him for the murder of a 22-year-old woman. While under investigation, Samuel was extradited to Florida and tried for the murder of another woman. Due to mistrust of witness testimonies, he was acquitted in January 1984. Samuel's reign of terror lasted for nearly 40 years. He was arrested in 2012 on drug charges, and while in custody, DNA evidence linked him to a couple of unsolved homicides. In 2018, Samuel began cooperating with authorities, providing detailed confessions to numerous unsolved murders. The FBI has confirmed his involvement in at least 60 of the 93 confessed murders, the largest number of confirmed victims for any serial killer in U.S. history. Samuel Little died on December 30, 2020, while serving multiple life sentences. Lonnie Franklin, aka the Grim Sleeper, was born on August 30, 1952 in Los Angeles. In the mid-80s, the LAPD became aware of an apparent serial killer targeting black female prostitutes. The killer, dubbed the Southside Slayer, was believed to be responsible for the murder of at least 13 sex workers in the mid-80s. Activist Margaret Prescott held weekly protests outside the LAPD's HQ in an effort to force the department into investigating the murders. She blamed the lack of police interest with the attention given to Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, who targeted women in upscale areas of Los Angeles and not poor black women. His spree lasted from 1984 to 2007, but the apparent gap in his slayings from the late 80s to the early 2000s gave him his nickname, the Grim Sleeper. Lonnie was finally arrested in 2010 through familial DNA after his son was arrested for carrying a gun in 2009 and had to give up a DNA swab. Investigators found hundreds of photos in his home. The images show nude black women of a wide age range, conscious or unconscious. After several delays and a lengthy pretrial, Franklin was found guilty of 10 murders and sentenced to death. On March 28, 2020, Franklin was found dead in his cell. Raul Meza Jr. was born in Austin, Texas on October 14, 1960. He had at least 3 different stepfathers and 3 half-siblings before he was 15 years old. Raul was first arrested in 1973 on shoplifting and burglary charges. He was released in 1974 and enrolled in high school, but failed every class. The following year on New Year's Eve in 1975, Raul, accompanied by 3 other individuals, robbed a convenience store and shot the manager in the back. The manager survived, and Raul was arrested and charged with aggravated robbery. He was charged as an adult and sentenced to 20 years at the age of 16. He was released on parole in 1981, less than 5 years into his bid. Less than a year later, an 8-year-old's body was found in a dumpster at an Austin elementary school. Raul was charged with sexual assault and murder. He was again released on parole in 1993 after serving less than 12 years. When released from prison, he tried to convince the public he had changed. On May 25, 2023, Raul was arrested and charged with the 2019 murder of his then neighbor and the 2023 murder of his roommate and longtime friend. The Austin Police Department said it is currently looking into at least 8 cold cases Meza could be connected to.